Have you ever had a desire so strong it felt almost like a calling? Have you ever missed something you never even had? It sounds crazy, but what if what's missing isn't a real baby, but a space for healing? In this video, you'll hear a real, deep, and unexpected story, the kind that stirs something inside us. Because what begins as simple curiosity turns into a whirlwind of emotion. Yes, it's about pain, but it's also about hope, reconnection, and a new, symbolic way of experiencing motherhood. Get ready to dive into an experience that challenges everything you understand about love, connection, and reality. What would you do if you discovered that a doll could heal wounds no one can see? Sounds strange? That's where the story gets interesting, because sometimes what seems like an illusion is exactly what saves us. Emily had always carried a kind of curiosity that lived quietly deep inside her soul, insistent but silent. Since her teenage years, she would see mothers with their babies and wonder, what is that love that changes everything really like? It was like an inner whisper, a timid desire to understand motherhood, not just with her body, but with her heart. As time went on, the uneasiness turned into something deeper, almost physical. It wasn't just a question. It was an absence begging for an answer. The impulse came on a random night, while she was mindlessly scrolling through videos and blogs. A title popped up. "My reborn baby helped me heal." She clicked, not expecting much, but there, in the emotional face of a stranger, something woke up. It was more than a toy. It was a piece of someone trying to rebuild themselves, and Emily understood. Maybe what seemed strange was actually what made the most sense. Her heart already knew. She just needed to accept it. The decision came gradually, like someone dipping into the sea, wary of the temperature. At first, she just did some research. Then she began saving photos. Eventually, she started to imagine, what if I had a reborn baby in my arms? It wasn't madness. It was emotional, need disguised as curiosity. She wanted to discover if maternal love could be felt, even symbolically. Little did she know that this curious step would spark a journey of emotional healing far deeper than she could have imagined. Emily didn't just want to know what it was like to be a mother. She wanted to feel it. Feel the weight in her arms, the instinct to care, the reflex to protect something small, fragile, and precious. It was a longing for motherhood that came from deep within, but had no clear destination. She had no children. She didn't know if she ever would, but there was a space in her chest that craved affection, connection, maybe even redemption. And that space, only motherhood seemed able to fill, even if only symbolically. In her mind, it wasn't about diapers or bottles. It was about touch, scent, routine, the kind of love that can't be explained. Some people call that madness. Others call it instinct. Emily called it emotional necessity. And there, in the silence of her own heart, she recognized something important. Even without a real baby, the love was real. And maybe, just maybe, a reborn doll could serve as a channel for that connection. A way to feel what it's like to love without limits, even while knowing it's symbolic. She started imagining what it would be like to have someone or something to care for. The ritual of changing clothes, the moment of resting in her lap, the tenderness before sleep. Was it pretending to be a mom? Maybe. But who says feelings need rules? Emily wanted to live the emotional experience. The physical part could come later, if ever. In that moment, she wasn't seeking conventional motherhood. It was a kind of symbolic motherhood that only those who felt the void can understand. And that's when the outside reactions started to show. The first time Emily mentioned the idea, it was at dinner with two close friends. She said it half jokingly, like someone dipping a toe to test the water. "I'm thinking of buying a reborn baby, just to see what it'd be like to be a mum, you know." The silence at the table was instant. One friend replied with a drawn-out, "Really?" dripping with judgment masked as curiosity. The other gave a tight, awkward smile, trying to be respectful, but clearly confused. In that moment, Emily realized not everyone would know how to embrace this. Family was a whole different story. Her mother said, "You don't need that, sweetie," while her brother commented she was being dramatic. To most people, it was just a doll. A strange idea, a bizarre escape. No one saw the attempt at emotional healing or the size of the wound she carried, and Emily, though outwardly composed, began to wonder if it really made sense. But what she felt inside, no one could explain that for her. Over time, Emily learned to speak less about it. Others' reactions were always a mirror of their lack of understanding. She realized some emotions only make sense to those who felt them. It wasn't reborn therapy just because it was trendy. It was an emotional tool that came from a deep urge to nurture, to reclaim parts of herself lost in time. And despite the judgment, the desire only grew stronger. Because sometimes, what the world sees as strange is exactly what the soul needs. That's when the next step came. The purchase. Emily spent days deep in research, visiting sites, reading testimonials, watching reborn baby unboxing videos like she was studying for a life-changing moment. She discovered there were different styles, textures, expressions, and that the prices varied as much as the emotions of those buying. Each doll seemed to tell a story, and she wanted one that looked like the baby she'd dreamed of, even without ever having one. But with the desire came fear. What if I regret this? The final choice came after much back and forth. A baby with closed eyes, a serene expression, wrapped in a blanket. It looked asleep. Emily's heart raced just, seeing the photos. It was as if something inside her whispered, "This is the one." And when she clicked the buy button, she felt a mix of relief, anxiety, and an emotion too complex for words. She wasn't buying a doll. She was taking a real step in her journey of self-discovery. The fear lingered. What will people say? What if I feel nothing? But deep down, she knew that reborn doll didn't have to make sense to anyone else. It was a sincere attempt to cope with the silent grief she had carried for years. She needed something real for her heart, even if it wasn't alive in the eyes of the world. And now, all she had to do was wait. The next chapter was coming, inside a box, wrapped in plastic, and emotion. The day the box arrived seemed ordinary, but for Emily, it was as if the universe paused for a few seconds. The doorbell rang differently, almost solemnly. She walked down the stairs with her heart in her throat, knowing this moment was more than just a delivery. It was the beginning of an emotional journey. The box was simple, discreet, but filled with anticipation and something more. Hope. She carried the box to her room like it was something fragile and sacred, sat on the bed, took a deep breath, and with trembling hands began to open it. Each layer of plastic felt like it was protecting not only the reborn baby, but also everything she felt. When she finally saw it, the soft body, the realistic details, the delicate blanket, something inside her broke, but it was a sweet breaking, like a tear falling, not from pain, but from relief. Emily stayed there for a few minutes, just looking. There was no rush. She pressed her forehead to the dolls, as if saying, "You're here." Yes, it was strange, but also profoundly real. The feeling of touching the vinyl skin, holding the weight in her arms, seeing that serene expression. It awakened old and new emotions at once, and in that moment, without saying a word, she knew something had changed, and no one could predict what would come next. It didn't take long, just a few minutes with the reborn baby in her arms, and Emily began to feel something she couldn't name. It was a mix of peace and confusion, as if the world around her had gone silent. Her hands were trembling slightly, but her heart, her heart was pounding. These were real emotions, even if the baby wasn't. And right there, in that moment, frozen in time, she cried. But it wasn't a desperate cry. It was a release, a catharsis. The kind of emotion that only comes after holding it in for too long, pretending to be strong. Emily allowed herself to feel everything: the grief, the longing, the symbolic love. It was as if the doll represented everything she had locked away, everything left unsaid. And for the first time in a long while, she felt heard, even in silence. She hadn't expected so much. She thought it might just be curiosity, a passing experience. But no, it was something deep, intimate, almost spiritual. This wasn't just a toy. It was an extension of what she had lost and what she still carried. Her symbolic motherhood began right there, in a timid touch, in unexplained tears. And when night fell, Emily discovered that even more was to come. That night, Emily didn't want to leave the reborn baby out of her room. She placed a small blanket in the once empty crib and, with all the care in the world, laid the doll there as if it were flesh and blood. It was instinctive, as if, suddenly, her routine made sense again. The silence in the house was no longer the same. Now there was a symbolic presence, full of meaning. She lay down, staring at the crib, and for a few minutes couldn't close her eyes. She thought about how strange it all seemed, and yet, how completely right it felt. She wanted to get up in the middle of the night, just to check if the baby was still there. And even though she rationally knew it was just a doll, her heart insisted on responding as if it were rare. It was subtle, but real. It wasn't exactly happiness, more like a truce between the pain and the desire to move forward. Emily still couldn't quite explain what she was experiencing, but she knew that this reborn baby had awakened a maternal instinct in her that had never truly been asleep. And in the days that followed, her mind began to overflow with thoughts. In the following days, Emily's mind became a whirlwind. Have I lost it? That question echoed more than once in her head. At the same time that she felt touched by an unexpected peace, there was also that inner voice questioning everything. Was it really possible to feel so much for something that wasn't real? But what is real, anyway? The pain was real. So was the relief. So why wouldn't the love be? She started thinking about everything she had carried for years. The longing for motherhood, the unspoken grief, the ache for a baby that never came. This experience brought buried feelings to the surface. It wasn't about playing house. It was about emotional reconstruction. And with every new thought, Emily began to see that this journey with the reborn baby wasn't a detour from reality. It was part of her healing process. Sometimes she found herself laughing alone. Other times she would cry in the shower. But all of it was part of an intense and transformative emotional experience. Questioning herself made sense. Feeling did too. And in that silent storm of emotion, Emily began to accept that maybe her greatest strength was in allowing herself to live it, without shame, without explanation, without asking for permission. But the biggest transformation was still to come. Without realizing it, Emily began to create little rituals. In the mornings, she would change the reborn baby's clothes gently, as if it were a real act of care. She'd choose the outfits, with tenderness, run her hands over the fabric, match colors like it was a silent language of affection. These simple gestures began to fill the emptiness of a daily life, once marked only by absence and invisible pain. She spoke to him, softly, not expecting an answer, but as someone who just needs to be heard without judgment. Sometimes she'd talk about her day. Other times, she'd just sit quietly, watching. It was strange how much comfort that reborn doll brought. A bond was forming, not with the object itself, but with what it represented. Love, care, healing. And this began to build a kind of internal structure she hadn't known was there. In the late afternoons, Emily carved out a space just for herself. Soft lighting, calming music, and a quiet moment of emotional connection. It wasn't about pretending. It was about living more gently, especially with herself. A symbolic motherhood was blooming in the small details. Details that might seem silly to others, but were essential to her. Because what looked like play on the outside was actually emotional rebuilding, and that's when she began to see herself differently. As days passed, Emily started uncovering layers of herself she didn't know existed. With each act of symbolic care for the reborn baby, something inside her began to realign. She discovered a quiet, steady strength, something that had always been there but had been buried beneath the pain. It was a reconnection with her core, a dormant piece of maternal love that was finally waking up. She also noticed her vulnerabilities, not as weakness, but as sensitivity. Small things, like the scent of baby clothes or a lullaby, would bring her to tears. But those tears weren't negative. It felt like a cleansing, making space for healing. Her emotional healing was more real than ever. And in that internal mirror, she finally saw there was life inside her, even after so much loss. By accepting her pain and embracing this symbolic process, Emily rediscovered something powerful. She didn't need to fit into anyone's definition of motherhood. Her self-discovery happened in silence, through every symbolic gesture of affection. She wasn't less of a woman for it. In fact, she was more whole. And as she started seeing herself with more compassion, a new question formed. Would anyone else be able to understand this transformation? Talking about the reborn baby wasn't easy. At first, Emily avoided the topic. How do you explain to someone that you bought a doll to deal with grief? The thought of judgmental looks made her freeze. But the truth was, this decision made sense to her, even if it didn't to anyone else. It was her way of finding relief, of living what many would call symbolic motherhood. One day, during a conversation with a close friend, she let it slip. "He's helping me through this." Her friend raised an eyebrow, confused, but didn't interrupt. Emily used the silence to keep going. She explained the process, the emotions, the small rituals, and for the first time, someone really listened, with their heart. That conversation opened a door, not just for dialogue, but for the validation of a feeling that had, until then, felt invisible. After that, Emily started speaking more openly in small circles. A co-worker, a neighbor, someone from therapy. Not everyone understood, of course, but some listened, some reflected, some were even moved. The fear of judgment still lingered, but now it was met with courage. Because by sharing her story, she was telling the world that pain doesn't have to be hidden, and that healing can come in unexpected forms. Emily often found herself staring at the reborn baby in silence, trying to understand her own reaction. It was just a doll, right? No breath, no life. So why did her heart beat faster when she held it? Why the instinctive urge to protect, nurture, soothe? That conflict between logic and emotion left her confused, but also revealed just how much humans are driven by meaning. She began to wonder, what defines a real experience? Must there be biological life for a bond to exist? For her, the answer lay in the feeling. The real emotions that emerged couldn't be dismissed. It was a therapeutic doll, yes, but filled with intentions, longings, and old scars. What she was living wasn't a lie. It was a living metaphor for what still pulsed inside her, even after all the loss. That inner conflict, uncomfortable as it was, also served as a mirror. Emily started realizing that so many things in life are symbolic. Wedding rings, photographs, lullabies. The reborn doll was just another symbol carrying deep meaning. And if something can bring emotional healing, comfort, and reconnection, why not honor it? Still, a bigger question began to form in her mind. Deep down, Emily realized that all of this wasn't only about motherhood. The experience with the reborn baby had revealed something much greater. It was about learning to embrace herself. Each moment spent with that symbolic baby was a step toward her own story, toward the unresolved pains of her past. Reborn therapy wasn't just comfort. It was a mirror. And in it, she saw who she truly was, someone who needed to be heard. She saw how, for years, she had tried to fill the void with external expectations, becoming a mother, getting married, owning a house with a garden. But this process unveiled a deeper truth. What she was really seeking was self-acceptance. Symbolic motherhood had been the path that led her there. And along that path, she gave herself permission to stop trying to be perfect and just be. It was liberating. Painful, but liberating. More than anything, she realized her emotions were valid. What she felt was legitimate, even if others didn't understand. The reborn doll became a symbol, not of madness, as some might think, but of courage. Because in a world so fast and full of rules, allowing yourself to feel is an act of quiet rebellion. And in the midst of this internal revolution, Emily began to wonder what she would say to those who had judged such an intimate choice. If Emily could sit face to face with someone who had judged her, she probably wouldn't use long arguments or technical explanations. Maybe she'd just say, "You don't have to understand, just respect." Because deep down, what she had lived wasn't about convincing anyone. It was about living. The path of grief recovery and emotional healing is never the same for two people, and what seems strange to one may be salvation for another. A lot of people think there's a script for dealing with pain. Cry, wait it out, move on. But no one talks about silent pain, invisible grief, feelings too big for words. The reborn baby wasn't a replacement. It was a channel, a way to give shape to what had been suffocating her from the inside. And, to those who still find it weird, Emily would simply say, "What's truly strange is pretending everything's fine when it's not." She believes empathy begins when we understand we don't have to live someone's story to respect it. If someone finds relief, healing, or reconnection through symbolic motherhood, who are we to say it's wrong? What is normal, anyway? Emily learned that love is real, even when the baby isn't. And with that truth in mind, she saw how much she had changed. Emily was no longer the same woman who began this journey. What had started as simple curiosity had transformed into an emotional journey of self-discovery, rebuilding, and deep healing. The pain that once took up all the space now shared room with understanding, hope, and a new way of looking at motherhood. More human, more conscious, more her own. The reborn doll had become a mirror, reflecting forgotten parts of herself. In the small symbolic routines, in the silences now filled with tenderness, Emily found her strength again. She came to understand that maternal love goes far beyond biology. It's about care, connection, and presence. But as the days passed, something inside her began to shift. What had once been a comfort now felt like something more, as if this entire emotional process had been a rehearsal for something greater. A new desire began to grow, no longer symbolic, but real. Today, Emily looks ahead with a steady heart. She keeps the reborn baby close, grateful for everything it represented, but she feels it's time to experience something true. She wants to become a mother, for real. And now, unlike before, she feels ready, without fear, without guilt, with peace in her chest. The reborn therapy fulfilled its purpose. And Emily, with a new light in her eyes, is ready to write a new chapter, one where her dreams take on flesh, voice, and life. And now that you've seen all of this, tell me, how many invisible pains do we carry, trying to look strong? How many times do we stay silent, afraid of being judged, when all we really need is to be embraced? Maybe what this story shows, above all, is that healing can come from the most unexpected places. And no, this isn't something for the weak. It's something for those who survive by feeling. If you've been through something similar, or if this story touched a quiet place inside you, I invite you to share in the comments. Your story might be the strength someone else needs today. Let's create a space where no one has to hide their pain, their healing process, or their way of loving. Here, we talk about everything the world pretends not to see. And of course, if you want to hear more heartfelt stories like this, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss anything that might touch or transform you. And if this video made sense to you, share it with someone who might need to see they're not alone. Because in the end, we're all just trying, in our own way, to find a place of peace.